Well, my name's Tarzan of the Apes, formerly John Clayton III, son of Lord and Lady Greystoke.
Yeah, and I'm Han Solo, and this is my sidekick, Chewbacca.
Jason's not the only person who's visited Manhattan. Yes, Tarzan went to Manhattan as well in 1989's Tarzan in Manhattan. So this is a made-for-TV movie directed by Michael Schultz. It stars Joe Lara as Tarzan. Joe Lara recently passed away about a year or so ago of me doing this video. And here he plays, obviously, Tarzan in a very kind of somewhat campy movie, I have to say. You've got Tony Curtis, Jean-Michael Vincent and Kim Crosby as Jane. So, the story here is a kind of fish out of water story. Tarzan, in the beginning of the movie, the first 10 minutes, we see him in Africa, and he follows a group of hunters as they kidnap Cheetah, his obviously chimpanzee friend, and he kind of follows them back to New York, meets up with Jane, who in this adaptation is a tough-talking New York cabbie, and we find out that Jean-Michael Vincent's character is a head of a shady organisation that is doing some type of animal experiments for nefarious reasons. What'll happen? You're just going to have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works with Tarzan in Manhattan. I've always liked the Tarzan character. This one does take some liberties, obviously, with the Edgar Rice Burroughs mythology. So purists may be a little bit disturbed by some of the kind of the changes here. But I think if you can kind of get over that, there is still actually a fun little, albeit lightweight adventure here. So Tarzan in this, played by Joe Lara, is played fairly straight. He's kind of always quite an earnest performance, and I kind of appreciated that. I mean, Joe Lara looks the part. He's very kind of like 80s kind of style, glam, model-esque kind of looking Tarzan. Not obviously a particularly kind of realistic, but certainly a fantasy version of what this kind of Tarzan character would look like. A little bit like Miles O'Keefe did in Tarzan the Ape Man. But I quite like the fact that this movie is kind of around Tarzan. It's quite silly, jokey, even campy at times, certainly tongue-in-cheek. But Joe Lara plays this character fairly straight. He always has this kind of earnest performance. And I have to say, I quite like some of the physical acting here. Just the kind of little touches when, like, Tarzan's walking downstairs in Manhattan, he'll kind of swing off sort of small ledges and stuff like that, just to kind of give him this kind of slightly kind of odd sort of sense of he's obviously a stranger in a kind of strange land. Doesn't kind of physically act like everyone else, and still has those sensibilities that you would expect maybe Tarzan to have. So I kind of quite like the choice here. I kind of really like the adaptation of Jane. This is one of the kind of the big changes with Jane. She's not the kind of demure lady that she is in some adaptations. Here she's kind of very kind of streetwise and certainly more overt in her flirtation with Tarzan. But it actually, I think it gives her more to do and makes her a bit more of a proactive kind of character rather than the kind of more passive character that she is in kind of some adaptations. So I kind of like the change there, to be honest. The movie does have some quite kind of funny comedy moments. Tony Curtis looks like he's having an absolute ball making this movie. It's somewhat over the top, I have to say. Tony Curtis somewhat kind of is a little bit too flamboyant in places, and I think overacts, but it gives it this kind of lightweight kind of sense of fun. And the adventure, albeit there's kind of some real bad plot holes here. For example, Tony Curtis they're breaking this happens. I should be going to the negatives yet. They break into Jean-Michael Vincent's house, and Tony Curtis shoots a guard and presumably kills him. And there's like, you've broken into someone's house and shot someone. There should be consequences for this, but there isn't. Anyway, but it still has this kind of like this fun adventure element, kind of almost like kind of a swashbuckling sort of kind of feel to it, and it's fairly kind of well paced, I have to say. There are some kind of comedic moments here, and I think the work with animals is done pretty well. Cheetah, there's a bunch of chimps in this movie. I've got to say, it's kind of, they make him kind of quite a likeable kind of character, and albeit it goes into some silly moments and times, It's, you know, there are some kind of fun moments, particularly when, for example, Cheetah is driving a kind of police car in one instance. So what doesn't work, yes, it's kind of somewhat of a different take on Tarzan in many ways. It does keep some of the kind of the classic elements, but some of the changes, as I've mentioned, will kind of put people off who are more purists, kind of the source material. I gotta say, I think more could have been done with the fish out of water stuff. It feels like they really only dipped a toe in what that would be like. And the Tarzan here is I have to say, is far more civilized than many adaptations. At the beginning of the movie, he hasn't met Jane, but he's kind of quite well read. He's reading books and stuff, can speak perfect English. So you never really get the sense he's like this wild man as such. He's more of like a person who is naive and has lived in the kind of the wilderness, but is, you know, he can communicate perfectly well. He's well read, somewhat intelligent, you know. So it's kind of like it takes some of that rawness out of the you know, the kind of the character that I feel makes him somewhat of a more unpredictable kind of character and maybe potentially more dangerous. So he does feel kind of somewhat muted here. As I've mentioned, there are some kind of plot holes there and stuff that is just kind of glossed over. Maybe in kind of '89 as a teen movie, people didn't really care. But yeah, there are some overly kind of silly moments in here. Obviously, how he kind of, you know, gets into kind of like country with presumably a fake passport and stuff like that. Stuff is just kind of glossed over, and you feel like there's, as I've kind of already mentioned, there's a real kind of lack of consequences in this movie. Things kind of what are done, even kind of the motivation of Tarzan to basically face off with one of Jan Michael Vincent's men who ultimately killed his ape mother. You feel it's kind of somewhat of kind of an anti-climax, I have to say. I was expecting, you know, a little bit more of a resolution in regard to that, and it's kind of like, oh, that kind of was just kind of glossed over fairly quickly. And to be honest, I think that the bad guy, Jan Michael Vincent, more could have been done with that to kind of make it more threatening. And his kind of motivations are really kind of like pure kind of B-movie hokum. And that's the kind of the feeling of this movie. It really does feel like a B-movie, kind of a quite silly kind of adaptation. Obviously, you know, you can't say, oh, Tarzan's a really realistic portrayal of what would happen, but, you know, you look at things like Greystoke with obviously Christopher Lambert, certainly a kind of a more grounded take on the character, but this one feels just a little bit lightweight, just a little bit silly at times, and a little bit kind of too B-movie-ish, but it's still an enjoyable romp. And that's the best way I would describe this movie. I am a Tarzan fan. I do kind of quite like these kind of movies, and I've always enjoyed the character. So maybe I'm somewhat biased in this respect, but, you know, realistically, I can't give this movie any higher than a 5, which is kind of an average score, because it is just a little bit too kind of like cheesy and kind of silly at times. But I still feel it's an enjoyable film. You can enjoy the characters here, and I think it's elevated by some of the changes here. I think some of the changes work well. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.